At 3:23 a.m. on November 13, 1942, Commander Gunther Preen watched through the periscope of the U-47 as the imposing silhouettes of the British Atlantic Fleet lay anchored in Scapa Flow, Scotland. It was a fortress considered impregnable, protected by treacherous currents, minefields, and anti-submarine nets. No enemy had penetrated those waters in 25 years. British admirals considered Scapa Flow absolutely safe. The natural defenses of the Kirk Sound Strait were reinforced by intentionally sunken ships, blocking any underwater passage. The Royal Navy kept its most powerful warships there, including the battleship HMS Royal Oak, a 29,000-ton colossus with a crew of 624 men. But that night, something the British called a steel coffin and the Germans themselves ironically nicknamed the Iron Shark had achieved the impossible. The U-47 was a Type VIIB submarine, only 66 meters long, moving silently at 8 knots through a gap British naval engineers swore did not exist. Preen was known in the Kriegsmarine as the Bull of Scapa Flow, but that title would only come after that night. At that moment, he was just another U-boat commander executing a mission the German Naval High Command considered suicidal. The chances of survival were estimated at less than 10%. But the plan had been meticulously prepared. The story had begun 3 months earlier, in August 1939, when Captain Zur See Karl Donitz, commander of the German submarine force, received aerial photographs of Scapa Flow taken by an agent disguised as a tourist. The images revealed something surprising: the tidal currents had shifted some of the block ships in Kirk Sound, creating a passage only 17 meters wide. Donitz presented the plan to Admiral Erich Raeder, who responded categorically, "Impossible. A submarine will never cross those currents without being detected or destroyed." British intelligence officers held the same opinion. Scapa Flow was inviolable. But Donitz did not accept impossible. He chose his best commander, Gunther Preen, 31 years old, a veteran of 12 successful patrols. On October 8, 1939, the U-47 left Wilhelmshaven at 10:15 a.m., officially on a routine patrol in the North Pacific. Only Preen and Donitz knew the true destination. The crew of 44 men was informed 3 days later, once they were far from the coast. The reaction was one of disbelief. "Scapa Flow? The commander has gone mad," the chief engineer whispered. For 6 days, the U-47 sailed submerged during the day and on the surface at night, avoiding British destroyers and patrol planes. On October 13, at 7 p.m., the submarine was positioned 10 miles from Scapa Flow, awaiting a favorable tide. Preen reviewed the maps for the 10th time. The window of opportunity would be only 2 hours, between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. At 11:07 p.m., the U-47 began its approach on the surface. The night was too clear for Preen's liking. The northern lights illuminated the sky with a ghostly green light, making the submarine visible for hundreds of meters. Every man on board knew that if they were detected there would be no escape. Coastal batteries would tear them apart in seconds. Kirk Sound was a death trap. The tidal current reached 9 knots, faster than the U-47's maximum surface speed. A navigation error of half a meter and the submarine would be hurled against the sunken ships or the rocks. Preen kept the periscope up, his hands sweaty on the control wheel. Engines 1/3. Rudder 5 degrees to starboard. At 11:31 p.m., the U-47 crossed the first line of defense. No one on board breathed. The submarine scraped the hull of a sunken merchant ship, producing a metallic sound that echoed in the conning tower. "Damn it," whispered the helmsman. But there was no alarm. The British heard nothing. Or they didn't believe what they heard. At 12:27 a.m. on October 14, the U-47 surfaced inside Scapa Flow. Before Preen lay the Atlantic Fleet, the battleship HMS Royal Oak, the cruisers HMS Repulse and HMS Hood, destroyers, and supply ships. It was the heart of the Royal Navy, completely defenseless. Preen ordered, "Tubes 1, 2, 3, and 4, ready. Target, Revenge-class battleship, 3,000 yards." At 12:58 a.m., the first salvo of 4 G7A torpedoes was fired. The U-47 shuddered. Preen counted the seconds. 90 seconds to impact. But something went wrong. Only one torpedo hit the Royal Oak, exploding on the starboard side near the bow. The damage was minimal. Aboard the battleship, officers thought it had been an internal explosion, perhaps in the ammunition stores. Preen was furious. 3 torpedoes had failed. But he had more. Reload all tubes. Fast. The torpedo men worked frantically, sweating in the suffocating heat of the submarine. Each torpedo weighed 1,500 kilograms and had to be manually loaded into the tubes. It took 13 minutes. 13 minutes in which the U-47 was exposed inside Scapa Flow. At 1:16 a.m., the second salvo was fired. 3 torpedoes, all hitting the HMS Royal Oak on the starboard side, in the engine section and the ammunition magazines. The explosion was apocalyptic. A column of fire and water rose 100 meters high. The battleship listed 45 degrees in 30 seconds. The men inside the watertight sections were crushed or drowned instantly. The Royal Oak sank in 13 minutes. Of the 1,234 people on board, 833 died, including 134 boys under the age of 18. Vice Admiral Henry Blagrove, commander of the 2nd Battle Squadron, went down with the ship. It was the worst British naval disaster since the First World War. And it all happened in what was supposed to be Britain's safest port. But Preen was still trapped inside Scapa Flow. Now the entire base was on high alert. Searchlights scanned the bay. Destroyers revved their engines. Coastal batteries were activated. The U-47 dove to 20 meters and sailed at maximum submerged speed toward Kirk Sound. Every second counted. The depth there was only 30 meters. There was nowhere to hide. At 2:15 a.m., the U-47 resurfaced at the entrance of Kirk Sound. The current was now against them, pushing the submarine back into Scapa Flow. Preen ordered full power. The diesel engines roared. The submarine advanced at only 2 knots against the tide. Behind them, searchlights closed in. A destroyer opened fire. Shells exploded 200 meters away. For 40 minutes, the U-47 fought the current. Several times it was seconds away from being hurled against the rocks. Preen held the rudder with brute force, his arm muscles trembling. At 2:58 a.m., the submarine finally crossed Kirk Sound and entered open waters. Behind them, Scapa Flow was a pandemonium of lights and explosions. But the U-47 had vanished into the darkness. News of the sinking of the Royal Oak reached London at 6 a.m. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, turned white as he read the report. "Impossible," he murmured. "Scapa Flow is inviolable." But it was true. And worse, no one knew how the submarine had entered or exited. The British press was ordered into total censorship. The information could not be released. But Germany showed no such caution. On October 18, the U-47 docked in Wilhelmshaven under a storm of flash photography and Nazi flags. Adolf Hitler personally decorated Gunther Preen with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Joseph Goebbels turned Preen into a national hero. The Bull of Scapa Flow was in cinemas, radios, and newspapers. It was exactly what Nazi propaganda needed. The Royal Navy panicked. If a submarine could penetrate Scapa Flow, no British port was safe. Immediately, the Atlantic Fleet was moved to ports on the west coast of Scotland. Millions of pounds were spent to build permanent barriers in Kirk Sound, concrete structures called Churchill barriers, which still exist today and are considered one of the greatest engineering feats of the Second World War. The psychological impact was devastating. The myth of British invincibility at sea was destroyed. And it wasn't just a symbolic blow. With the Atlantic Fleet displaced, German U-boats gained freedom of operation in the North Atlantic, sinking thousands of tons of Allied merchant ships in the following months. The Battle of the Atlantic, which would cost 3,500 ships and 72,000 lives, was just beginning. But Gunther Preen's fate would be tragic. He returned to sea for 7 more patrols, sinking 30 Allied ships and becoming the second most successful U-boat commander in the Kriegsmarine. He was adored by his crew and respected by his enemies. But on March 7, 1941, during an attack on a British convoy in the North Atlantic, the U-47 disappeared without a trace. To this day, it is not known exactly what happened. The official British version states that the destroyer HMS Wolverine sank the U-47 with depth charges. But there is no confirmation. Some historians believe the submarine was destroyed by one of its own faulty torpedoes. Others say it hit a mine. Gunther Preen, 33, and his 44 crew members were never found. The HMS Royal Oak remains at the bottom of Scapa Flow, 30 meters deep, designated as a protected war grave. Divers are not permitted to enter the ship. Every year on October 14, the Royal Navy holds a ceremony in memory of the 833 men who died that night. A British flag is placed over the wreckage by Navy divers. The gap in Kirk Sound that allowed the U-47 to enter was sealed by the Churchill barriers, built between 1940 and 1944 by 1,300 Italian prisoners of war. The barriers are 1.5 kilometers long and made of 250,000 tons of concrete and 66,000 stone blocks. They connect the Orkney Islands and turn Scapa Flow into a truly impenetrable fortress. But it was too late. The attack on Scapa Flow demonstrated that no defense is absolutely secure and that daring, combined with meticulous planning, can overcome any obstacle. Karl Donitz, who planned the operation, was promoted to Grand Admiral and, after Hitler's death, briefly became the last leader of Nazi Germany for 23 days in May 1945. He died in 1980 at the age of 89. The submarines the Royal Navy disparagingly called steel coffins and iron sharks proved to be the deadliest weapons of naval warfare. During the Second World War, German U-boats sank 2,779 Allied ships, totaling 14 million tons. But the price was high. Of the 1,162 vessels the Kriegsmarine operated, 783 were sunk, with the loss of 30,000 German submariners, a mortality rate of 75%. The story of the U-47 and Gunther Preen remains one of the most audacious episodes of naval war. The iron shark that invaded the impenetrable port, sank a battleship in 30 seconds, and escaped unscathed. The British laughed at the German submarines, until one of them penetrated the heart of their fleet and proved that the impossible was just a matter of courage, skill, and perfect timing. And that lesson was never forgotten.